Hello, welcome to the first section of the cryptocurrency course. We feel that it is imperative to understand why there was a need created for the creation of Bitcoin. To understand this reason, we need to go back into history and examine the various mediums of exchange that were used prior to the Bitcoin. We need to understand the concept of money and how it evolved over time and which physical forms it took. We need to analyze what went right with each of those mediums and what went wrong, and then understand why we are calling the Bitcoin one of the most evolved, sophisticated and secure mediums of exchange ever created. So let's start with the story of money. So we first started with the barter system around 6000 BC, where we exchanged goods for goods. Then we moved on to all kinds of coins, including gold coins around 650 BC. We then came up with printed currency around 960 AD, followed by the system of checks, which was the most basic form of checks were first used in 1717 AD. Then PayPal came up in 1919 AD, and finally in 2009 the Bitcoin was released. So let's start with the first type, the barter system. The barter system is the oldest known medium of exchange known to mankind. At its base and concept, it was really simple and logical. Every individual in the economy would produce what he or she specialized in or was most efficient at. Now, then they would exchange these goods for those goods that they would require. Now, this worked for a while until certain flaws started to emerge. The first one was that there was no common unit of value. Now, what do we mean by common unit of value? Let's take an example. Let's say an individual A grows rice and an individual B has herds of cattle. They decide to exchange one cow for 10 quintals of rice. Now, this is a particular valuation that they have agreed upon mutually at that particular point of time only. This may change in the future. At the same time, if A wants something else now, say bread, and goes to a baker called C, C will have a different value for A's rice. C may value the rice less or more than B. So every time A wants to go and transact something, he has to come up with a new valuation depending on the relative utility that the parties get from the transaction. So the requirement was to have one common unit of value that would suffice for all transactions. Second was that goods were perishable. You see, when you're trading in the barter system, all the goods wouldn't last for a longer period of time, and the point of time when you require something else may not match that time when you have that good. So in this example, if A has 10 quintals of rice now, but wants bread 10 days from now, he cannot hold the rice till those 10 days, or he cannot bring and transact the bread and bring it now and expect the bread to last for 10 days. So goods used to get finished fast, and you needed a medium of exchange that could withstand time, that could last even later on. The third was that you could not transport these goods easily. Now, this is a fairly simple and obvious flaw. When you're actually trading physical goods for physical goods, some are bound to be heavier, and thus transportation and actually exchanging these goods was not the easiest of tasks. Finally, the system wasn't secure, which means that anyone could just steal your goods and transact them later. So security was a big issue. So we wanted a system which was secure, which could hold as a common unit of value across everyone in the economy, which could last time, and which was easier to transport. This is how we came to the concept of gold coins. The gold coins solved the most fundamental flaw of the barter system. That is, they gave the economy a common unit of value. What this means is that every individual in the economy valued gold and would accept it as a legal tender or a medium of exchange for all goods. Second, they weren't perishable. So even if you have gold today and you do not need to purchase anything, you can use this gold in the future sometime, which you could not do with perishable goods in the barter system. And third, this is an important point from the perspective of Bitcoin, so you can note it down. The gold was non-inflationary, which meant that there was only a limited amount of gold in the world to be mined. And thus, because of this limited supply, there would be no inflation. That would mean the value of gold technically wouldn't go down in the long run. However, it wasn't a perfect system. And yes, it was much more transportable compared to actual physical goods. But now let's look at what didn't work out for the gold system. The first is that it was expensive to mine. To actually create a gold coin would require digging up a gold mine and then actually making the coin. So it wasn't cheap, it was a tedious process. And the very concept of gold is that it is rare, so accessing gold wasn't exactly the easiest task either. Second, it was heavy to carry around. Now, this might seem contradictory to the fact that it is comparatively transportable to, say, physical goods, but compare gold coins to today's mediums of exchange, like notes or electronic cash. For a small amount, gold coins made sense. Maybe a few coins would be relatively easy to carry around. But imagine if you're trying to buy, in those times, say, a palace. That would be a lot of coins and a lot of weight. So comparatively, it was heavy. And gold coins did not provide security. They could be stolen. So this was the fundamental and the most important flaw with the gold coin. They did not have the receiver's identity or the sender's identity on it, the owner's identity, and thus they could be stolen and used for other purposes. And this is the problem that the next medium and many mediums to follow would try to solve. And again, the security is an issue that is really important to the creation of the gold coin. Thus we came to the next form of medium of exchange, the paper currency. So paper currency is a concept that goes back many years. However, it is still relevant today and it is still being used today. So how did they come about? The first forms of paper currency came when people started depositing their gold into banks and vaults for safekeeping. In return, they would be issued receipts or IOU certificates that they can redeem at any given point of time in exchange for that amount of gold. Now, eventually people started realizing that these papers by themselves have indirect value because they can be redeemed for a physical amount of gold. So instead of redeeming the gold and then exchanging it, people simply started exchanging these receipts or papers. And that was the formation of the first paper currency. This solved certain issues with the systems that we'd seen before. First, it was really light to carry compared to gold coins and much cheaper to produce because it was made out of wood and paper. And second, they were backed initially. The gold-backed currency was backed by a physical commodity that was gold. So they carried value because every paper would be directly denominated in the amount of gold that it stood for. Now, eventually people shifted to a fiat currency system. A fiat currency is a currency that has value only because you believe it has value. Now, this is another concept which is really important for the Bitcoin. What humans did was essentially, if you look at it, you would buy a gold-backed currency note because you knew that you could redeem it for gold. Now, in this case, it is the gold that has value, that has common value in everyone's minds. Exchange or replace gold by another, in this case, an intangible commodity that also carries equal weight and value in everyone's mind. Say the trust of government. If everyone trusts their government and their central bank, then they will trade any kinds of paper that central bank issues. That is why every fiat currency today has is also called a promissory note, because the governor of that bank essentially signs an agreement that says that you can exchange that particular note back at the government for that specified amount, and they will redeem you for it. And that is how the value stays intact. So later on, instead of being backed by gold, the fiat currencies, the currency was started getting backed by the trust or the value of the government that issues them. Now let's see where paper currencies went wrong. For starters, they did not solve the concept of security, and one could argue that a lot of crime can be directly related to this very fundamental flaw of the paper currency. The fact that it can be stolen meant that people who did not earn it or deserve money could actually own money just by stealing it. So security was not solved. The fiat currencies were inflationary. Now if you remember, gold currencies were non-inflationary because there was limited supply. And to that effect, gold-backed currency was also non-inflationary because they were directly related to the amount of gold that they stood for. However, fiat currencies could be issued in unlimited quantities by the government that backed them. And this created a problem dominated by basic economics. If you keep on printing currency, the supply increases, and thus the value of every note will just go down. And this created a problem for many countries. We saw instances of hyperinflation in Germany, in Tanzania, recently in Zimbabwe. The next problem with paper currency was that you could not keep a track of who is holding the currency or this money, how is it being circulated, and for what purpose. So there was no way of tracking this money. And this gave rise to black money and parallel economies and different kinds of usages, including illegal usages like for terrorism or money laundering. All of this could have been prevented if we had invented a system to track these notes and know where they're going. Finally, we shifted away from the gold standard because it reduced the flexibility of central banks to use the monetary and fiscal policies to regulate the economy. Finally, there was a time when we really needed to address the most fundamental flaw in all these mediums of exchanges, that is security. And that was solved with the next medium, the check. So checks finally solved the concept and issue of security. They did this by specifying the sender and receiver identities and addresses on that piece of paper. So what is a check? It's a contract where a lot of data is specified, including who's sending the money, who's the intended receiver of the money, what is the exact amount of the money, how much is being transferred, and by what date should that money be transferred. So it had a kind of a validity date. And finally, another form of security was added, the signature. Now you can look at the signature as the most basic form of cryptography method used. And this was used to validate that transaction. You see, just having a sender and receiver address on a piece of paper does not make it valid. This could be faked. However, a signature would verify that the sender himself has sent or has authorized this transaction. These two concepts or these 2 points are very important from the perspective of Bitcoin, so you may want to note it down. Finally, the user could specify the amount in the check. So you see, imagine transacting $1 million and doing this in either in hard cash, that's paper cash, or in a check. In paper currency, you would need a lot of notes and it would be a thick wad. However, a check would be one single piece of paper with the numericals 1 million written on it. So let's see where the checks went wrong. The first concept was that of those of bearer checks. Bearer checks were checks which anyone could redeem. It did not depend on the sender identity. So anyone bearing the check could redeem it for that particular amount. And this completely took away the whole concept of security of checks. But they were just one form. Second, checks used a very basic form of cryptography, the signature. And it was the easiest to override, the easiest to replicate. And finally, signatures started being faked, and people understood that signatures are not secure enough method to validate transactions. Finally, the biggest flaw of checks and the biggest drawback was that there was a huge validation time. What I mean is, from the point that a transaction is made and goods are exchanged for a check, the seller is going to go to his own bank at a future date, deposit the check. The bank will then go to the clearinghouse and contact the sender's bank and then verify if the sender had that amount of money to begin with. Now, many things can go wrong. Maybe the sender had the amount to begin with at the time of transaction, but not at the time of clearing the check. Or the sender never had that kind of money. This would make the entire transaction void. However, the sender has the goods with him. So this worked to the detriment of the receiver. And this was the biggest problem. We needed a more secure and faster way of transacting. So the check was secure in many ways, but it really wasn't fast, and this made it very inefficient. We finally solved that with the concept of electronic and digital currency. E-wallets are a comparatively recent invention, and they have become very relevant in recent times. From America with PayPal, today most countries are trying to go cashless. However, e-wallets have effectively solved most of the problems of the previous mediums of exchanges. To start with, they did not need paper. Everything was digital. The concept that money is simply value and value need not be tangible in nature came about with e-wallets. It can simply be a number, and everyone will have a particular balance on a number that can be transacted. There is no need of making tangible money. Second, they just provided a higher level of security. Instead of signatures and in what checks used to use, today you can use your fingerprints and retina scans to validate transactions. The growth of e-wallets can be attributed to the growth of technology in general and the growth of the mobile phone industry and that of internet. From physical wallets and physical money, we've shifted to our mobile phones, which apart from doing 20,000 other things today, can do your transactions. All you need is an internet connection, a smartphone, and a phone that supports something like a fingerprint scanner or even a password. These are all higher levels of security than signatures. So the growth of this industry has greatly fueled the ease and the requirement of e-wallets. So this makes e-wallets function in a fast and efficient and convenient environment. Transactions are much faster, and this solves the entire problem that we had with checks in the first place. Transactions are today completed within a matter of seconds. So the receiver knows and already gets that amount of money. It is almost like replicating the old times when we used to exchange gold coins for gold coins and the transaction was validated immediately. Finally, it introduced a higher level of accountability into the system. Now, we could all see where the money is going, who's holding the money. No matter where money is, digital money is, they would leave a digital trail. So it became very difficult to avoid taxes, to fuel illegal activities, to launder money. And this brought about a very system of accountability. However, there was still a flaw. And this flaw wasn't evident up till recent times. See, I'm still very happy with my e-wallet, and I believe most of you are as well. But there was one flaw that didn't arrive until the year 2008. And that flaw was that it was tied to the same financial system. E-wallets were still a part of the current banking and financial ecosystem, where irrespective of which bank you have, if you think about it, it's still the same system with the same rules, with the same ways of functioning. So let's see why that was an issue. Technically, until 2008, no one really thought it was an issue. It was the crisis of 2008 that opened our eyes. 2008 showed us some fundamental flaws with our financial systems. It exposed an inefficient and corrupt financial system and participants. The financial markets crashed in a domino effect. So this was a time when globalization worked against us. The subprime mortgage crisis that happened in USA, there were so many global entities vested into this market that it had an effect all around the world. Many investment banks went bankrupt, some who were initially thought to be too big to fail. And then again, the ones who really were too big to fail got bailed out by the Federal Reserve. And what followed was the largest recession since 1929. The economic aftermath was huge. It dried up credit markets worldwide. It slowed down global activity worldwide. People lost their jobs, and the entire investment industry crumbled. And people realized that there's now a need to monitor this industry and keep gains realistic. But this is the financial and the economic aftermath. Something more important happened here. Something more emotional. People lost faith in the existing financial system, and they realized that their money is not safe with banks anymore. Conventionally, people used to go to the banks to keep their money safe and expected a minimal return back so that to compensate them for inflation. If you look back to the creation of the paper currency, that's how it all started. People started depositing their golds to ensure that they weren't stolen. Their wealth was safe, and this fundamental faith got eroded away after the 2008 crisis. Massive withdrawals from banks started, and called bank runs eventually finished off many banks. People started searching for alternatives, and this is when people realized that there is no substitute or alternative to the current financial system. What am I referring to the current financial system? It is the whole ecosystem consisting of retail banks, investment banks, commercial banks. No matter which bank you go to, they're all twigs from the same branch, and they all operate under the same rules, the same regulatory authorities, and thus all of them make the same mistakes. There is no alternative. Either you sit at home and keep your money at your house where it will depreciate, or you go to the bank and submit it. There had to be a new system that evolved, that came out of this. And this was the Bitcoin, the alternative financial ecosystem. And this happened in 2009. In 2008, a group of individuals and an individual under the pseudonym of Satoshi Nakamoto released a white paper that was called the Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And this laid the foundation for not just an electronic currency that disrupted and challenged the very nature of money itself, but also gave rise to a new technology called blockchain. Their biggest weapon in the arsenal, it removed the necessity for an intermediary. In the next videos, we will go on to see how the Bitcoin changes the way we think of money, changes the way it functions, and how the supporting technology gave rise to a lot more opportunity than we had initially imagined. Thank you. Please join the next video to understand how the Bitcoin functions, what it is, and what its future scope is.